Today's reading is a continuation of our faith origin stories from the book of Genesis, chapter 21. Isaac grew, and Abraham threw a big party on the day he was weaned. One day, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, and Abraham poking fun at her son, Isaac. She told Abraham, "Get rid of this slave woman and her son. No child of this slave is going to share inheritance with my son, Isaac." The matter gave great pain to Abraham. After all, Ishmael was his son. But God spoke to Abraham, "Don't feel badly about the boy and your maid. Do whatever Sarah tells you. Your descendants will come through Isaac. Regarding your maid's son, be assured that I'll also develop a great nation from him. He's your son too." Abraham got up early the next morning, got some food together and a canteen of water for Hagar, put them on her back, and sent her away with the child. She wandered off into the desert of Beersheba. When the water was gone, she left the child under a shrub and went off 50 yards or so. She said, "I can't watch my son die." As she sat, she broke into sobs. Meanwhile, God heard the boy crying. The angel of God called from heaven to Hagar, "What's wrong, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy and knows his situation. Up now, go get the boy. Hold him tight. He will father a great nation." Just then, God opened her eyes. She looked. She saw a well of water. She went to it and filled her canteen and gave the boy a long, cool drink. God was on the boy's side as he grew up. He lived out in the desert and became a skilled archer, and his mother got him a wife from Egypt. May God bless our hearing and understanding of these holy words. Thanks be to God.
So it was expected, because when I read this passage, I too had some questions that I hadn't remembered from previous times reading through it. And then I was reminded this morning, Lena coming to me and saying, if you don't answer these questions sufficiently, I have further questions about this reading. But at first glance, today's reading raises some red flags for our modern Western culture. It also would challenge what people would believe to be biblical family values. First, you recall that God sent messengers to Abraham and Sarah. We covered this last Sunday. These messengers told them that they were going to parent many children, as many as the kernels of sand in the sea or on the shore, as many stars as there are in the sky. And from those children would come great nations. And then Sarah laughed. That's the memorable part. Pretty ridiculous. But then God comes and rebukes Sarah. "Why would you laugh? Do you question this, my ability?" But then there's some time that passed, and Sarah hadn't become pregnant yet, so she's worried. And so, not wanting to miss out on this promise that God was granting to her and Abraham, she convinced her husband to take one of his maids and make her his other wife. This is the biblical family values we don't hear about. From this relationship, a son was born named Ishmael. But wait, there's more. A year later, Sarah gave birth to a son named Isaac. Oh, miracle of miracles. However, now there was jealousy in the household. Typically, the firstborn son was the one that would receive their father's inheritance, and I guess the same would be expected of inheriting God's blessing. Because of Sarah's jealousy about her son's inheritance, she told Abraham to cast his other wife, Hagar, and their son Ishmael into the wilderness. He did this, knowing that God would look after them, though The story doesn't reveal whether or not Abraham relayed that assurance to Hagar. Hagar didn't remember from her previous soiree out into the desert. She fled once before after feeling the scorn of Sarah's judgment. I think Sarah was a tough person to live with. God told Hagar at that moment then that her son was important and was protected. So this next time, she walked into the wilderness thinking that they were both goners. This second time, out in the wilderness, they got tired and thirsty and started to cry. God did not seem to hear Hagar's cries, but God heard Ishmael, not her. God spoke to Hagar saying, "Here's some water, and remember, Ishmael will be okay. He'll have many descendants." And Hagar later finds her son a wife, and we don't know what happens to her after that. I don't know how legible this is, but it's a family tree with Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar at the top, and the children they have, and the children they have. Isaac would get a wife named Rebekah, and they would parent Jacob and Esau. And these kids are important in the continuation of the Hebrew story. And some of their stories are just as fun and strange as the one we heard today. Ishmael and his wife would have 12 sons. He also had a daughter by his third wife. Ishmael is recognized by Muslims as the ancestor of Muhammad, alayhi as-salam. That's a phrase that Muslims say whenever they refer to the name of any prophet of God to show their respect. Peace upon him is the English translation. In the Quran, the holy book of Islam, says this respect must be given. Though by any standards, Hagar and Ishmael were treated unjustly. And as is true with many marginalized groups of people, the roles that they play are oversimplified. They are a driver, a maid, a surrogate, a janitor, a caregiver, a farmer. They're known by their roles, not by who they are, and often is the same when we label people as job stealers, immoral, filthy, or criminals. We've seen this just recently, how those with tons of money or those who are famous for whatever reasons are granted a higher value to the world than those who are not. And why? Because they have a louder platform, or they do their jobs well if their job is shooting baskets? There are many people whose stories continue to be unheard in our society. But the question remains, do we hear them? And are we as a church willing to support them in the ways they need? It reminds me of the golden rule, which I've said before is throughout all of the world's religions. In our Christian faith, it's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I thought that was pretty darn good. As a Christian, being kind and generous, or at least treating others to the level that they would treat me. But I learned that there's even a higher rule from that. Did you? We have the golden rule. What's above gold? Platinum? I'm not a mineralologist or a scientist of any sort. But the higher rule to the golden rule is to do unto others as they would prefer to have done unto them. In order to hear God's blessing through the least of these, we have to be able to listen to them, which involves noticing them and humanizing them. Yes, it is important that we give them water to quench their thirst. It is more important that we notice the systems that keep these imbalances of human value and human treatment in place. We must treat the rich and famous with the same dignity that we treat the houseless individual. And if we treat them with no dignity at all, then we need to examine ourselves. We must treat the migrant with the same dignity that we treat the rich and famous. And if we feel that's too much dignity for a person we do not know, we should re-examine the things that we think we know about the rich and famous. As people of faith in this day and age, let us be cautious that we do not behave like Abraham and Sarah, or like God, for that matter, in this story. We must strive for the dignity of every person. Now, in our United Methodist tradition, that's what we call being a reconciling congregation. Sure, reconciling means we welcome the LGBT community in to all levels of our ministries and leadership, but it also means that we are looking to whoever is going to be scapegoated next, and we are standing with them with the same fervor and the same strength. In the Christian tradition, we may refer to this as mercy and grace. But I recommend that in our everyday lives, we could just call it how we behave on Tuesday, or Wednesday, or every day. May this be so.